Hi, my name is Larissa. My channel is called Beekeeping Made Simple, and let's talk about when to harvest honey. Now there's two things, like when honey is physically honey and not nectar anymore, and you can pull it out of the beehive and extract it. But more importantly, what I want to talk about is when, the date and the calendar, can you actually take the honey out of the hive. So first let's talk about when. When are we physically taking the honey out of the hive and saying, all right, now it is time to see how much honey is in the hive, how much we want to leave them, and how much we can actually take. I'm going to make this easy for you. First, if you just want to learn how to keep bees without going down these rabbit holes of YouTube videos, check out my online beekeeping class at beekeepingmadesimple.com. It includes live chats, it includes direct mentorship where you can email me questions anytime, and it is made to help beginner beekeepers understand what to do, when to do it, and why we do it. Okay, back to when to harvest. July. Harvest in July. If you live in the United States, for most of the US, early July is a good time to harvest. Here in Pennsylvania, by early July, my beehives are like, you know, they're bringing in honey, but they're not building so much, and the big bloom season is done. I know beekeepers in Texas. Most of Texas, by the 4th of July, the big nectar flow is over. So that is a good cornerstone for those of you whose winter starts in December. July, the early summer for, you know, you guys in Australia, who are the opposite calendar as us. But here are some other, you know, factors to take into consideration to make sure that you are doing this the appropriate time. One, fill out an inspection sheet. If you don't have an inspection sheet, I have one you can download for free in the video description below. Open the hive every single week, those first 3 months that you get your bees, and fill out an inspection sheet. You don't have the hive open long, you don't pull out every single frame every single time, but open it up every single week in the spring and early summer months and write down how much honey is in there to the quarter frame if needed, and you will see that the hive is slowly growing, and then you'll see a huge boom. If you haven't seen my last video about how to make a beekeeping calendar, I highly recommend checking it out. The link is down below as well. This is what we call that honey flow, the nectar flow. It's the center of the beekeeping calendar. You will see that huge boom. It is when bees are festooning, which means they're building teens and building comb. Bees are bringing in honey. The amount of honey in the hive increases every single time you're opening it and checking it. You will see the population increase. You will see a lot of activity coming in and out of the hive. And then you will see it stop, like it just almost comes to a screeching halt. And that is when it is time to harvest for most of the US. Now, if you live in Hawaii, Florida, Georgia, places that have a very mild winter or like absolutely no frost in the winter, you might have another good bloom in the early summer. For Hawaii, that was the Christmas berry, or also known as the Brazilian pepper tree. And that was my second harvest, was in midsummer. I'd say probably August was when I harvested that. And so for those of you in some of the warmer climates, you might have that second harvest. But for a lot of the United States, early summer is, for a lot of the world, that early summer is the big bloom. So you will see that screeching halt. But the question is, does it stop and start up again? Well, if you have a very mild winter, then there's a good chance it will. There's, you know, just checking on your environment, walking around. If you have something like the Brazilian pepper tree that has a big bloom in the summertime, then yes. If you don't know of anything that's blooming in that midsummer, then probably not. You can also talk with other local beekeepers. You can sneak around on beekeeping Facebook pages or go to, beekeeping associations in your state, not necessarily your area, but, states in your climate zone, and check it out. But if you're not sure, it's always best, almost everything in beekeeping is always best to do it too early than too late, and to not take more honey than you think you should. So it's always better to just do that harvest, say early July. And if there is another harvest, then just, suck it up and do that second harvest if you really think necessary. Just keep in mind when harvesting that summertime, it's still warm out. It's still going to be warm out for quite a bit after you harvest. And if there isn't another big nectar flow, the bees need to bring in enough food to sustain the hive so they don't have to eat into their winter storage. So when harvesting, you either want to leave them a little bit more than you think you should, or pull it out, but put it in a freezer, a chest freezer or spare freezer you maybe have in your garage, and give it back to the bees when you're closing your hive up for winter later on. And the reason why you want to harvest at the right time or a little bit earlier than later is because when winter time comes, the bees need to cluster up to stay warm. And so those bees in the winter time that cluster up, those winter bees, have different, they're just a little bit different than the bees you see the rest of the year. They have higher fat deposits and they need to be super healthy. The queen is laying eggs for these winter bees in the summertime. And so once they are pupating, that's that critical stage when they need to be healthy. The varroa mites, most of the varroa mites in a hive, over 90%, will go in the cells with the pupa, and that's where they're laying eggs and their babies are feeding off of this pupa. And they make them so weak that they can't hatch, or they hatch and they have all these viruses and they're sickly, and when that first cold snap comes, they are too weak to properly cluster up and produce enough heat to keep the hive warm. So it is really important to treat your hive for varroa mites in the mid-summer time so your winter bees are healthy. If you harvest honey too late, then you're going to be treating for varroa mites after that harvest, and you might be too late to lower your hive's varroa mites to keep your winter bees healthy. So I would always harvest earlier than necessary than later. There are some treatments you can put in the hive when you have honey on the hive, but even if you can put the treatments in the hive, they might not be as effective. And even on the packaging, it says it's best to not have honey on the hive when putting this treatment in. Even though it can be done, it's not recommended that you do it. Now here in PA, there is another honey flow. I mean, there's goldenrod, there's flowers that bloom in the late summer, and that's fine. But that can be extra feed for the bees for winter time. And if necessary, you can always pull that frame out if you think that's too much honey for the hive during robbing season, and put it in a freezer. Even broken refrigerators and freezers, just put it in a freezer for a day so that you kill anything on it, and then put it into a broken refrigerator or broken chest freezer, and that will keep it safe from wax moth and small hive beetle and bees and insects trying to get to it. Another time you might want to harvest honey is just because your hive is full of it. I harvested twice in Hawaii. Because I had a really big nectar flow in February and March, and then there was another one in the summertime, early summertime. So I, didn't want to be picking up those heavy supers off the hive all summer long. It makes inspecting hives a lot harder and take longer. I wanted to be able to separate the honeys so that I had a much darker honey in the springtime, and I had a much milder, lighter honey that took a longer time to crystallize, which was perfect for harvesting comb honey in the summertime. And I wanted those two to be separate. So then there's also just the beekeeper. Like, how much honey do you want on your hive before you decide this is enough, this is getting really heavy, I am going to remove this. Just want to keep in mind how much honey you need to leave them for winter, and make sure that the hive has that before harvesting the excess. And then there's the question of, what does honey look like when it is ready to be taken off the hive? Well, first we have a frame of honeycomb, and when looking in the cells, you know that there's nectar inside if there's a shine, if there's liquid. It's the only time you're going to see liquid in a cell is when it's nectar. When nectar is ripe and what we call honey, then the bees will have a thin beeswax capping that they put over the nectar. If you are not sure what is under this capping, because there could also be pupa under that capping, it's the other time you'll see a cap over a cell, you can always just pop open one cap. But also, pupa have a very definite capping where you can see the walls of each cell, whereas when there's honey under it, it's kind of this bumpy capping and you can't see the walls of each hexagon cell when looking at it. Here is what capped pupa looks like, and here is what capped honey looks like. You want to harvest frames that are at least 75% capped. I like to do at least 3 full frames of capped honey before I go grabbing a frame that is 75% capped-ish. The frames that are more nectar, those are the frames you leave for the bees. You also don't harvest on really humid days. Don't pull honey out on those really humid days, because that moisture in the air will make your honey more likely to ferment. So are you ready to harvest honey? You want to see when your big beekeeping season is, when your hive is growing and expanding and building and packed, and you are like, oh no, I don't know what to do, I think my hive is going to swarm, and then you're going to see everything stop. And that's when you're going to harvest. If you live in a warmer climate, you're going to want to make sure that there is another bloom season. There is no other bloom season coming after that. And it's going to be a big bloom season. This shouldn't be like, oh, I think I might have some bulbs blooming, or I see some orange flowers in the neighbor's house. This is some wild tree like the Brazilian pepper tree that grows everywhere that's going to bloom. Or you have an orchard across the street with 100 trees that are going to be blooming in the late summer. This is a big bloom. You know, that takes about 1 million flowers to produce enough nectar to make a pound of honey. So we are not talking about my tomatoes are flowering and I have a couple plants there and there's 10 flowers for the bees to go to. We are talking about millions and millions of flowers. Don't forget, you have inspection sheets and you fill them out and you keep tallies throughout your hive inspections so that you can see how the hive is growing. And there's always hive scales. I have the link below to a hive scale that I have on one of my beehives, and that's another way you can use technology to keep track of your beehive and how it's doing for you. And if you want to leave your bees everything, you just want to make sure that there's enough bees to keep an eye on the honey, because creatures like small hive beetle will take advantage of a lot of food and not enough bees to defend it. Or other bees will come and rob the hive. So make sure they have a small entrance. And you take out the honey and put it somewhere else, like in a freezer, and give it back to the bees when it gets cooler out and you're preparing the hive for winter, if necessary. If you're seeing a lot of robbing. If you're noticing that the amount of honey is decreasing quite a bit, really fast, that's another sign of robbing. And if you want to leave your hive all that honey over winter, just know that you probably won't be able to harvest it for yourself. It's going to be honey that was in the hive during treatments, and it is probably going to crystallize, and it is going to be honey that is stored for your bees come next year, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. There is no reason why you need to take any honey from your bees. You just need to keep an eye on it and make sure that the bees can defend themselves and can defend this honey. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my online beekeeping class and my blog at beekeepingmadesimple.com, where there's lots of other free downloads and information to help beginner backyard beekeepers. See you next time. Honey harvesting time is a pretty fun time of year for the beekeeper. But the question is, you don't have to worry about bees flying in your mouth. Let me put this frame down.